Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Kalopsia podcast. I'm your host, Sydney, and I am so glad that you have joined me here today. If my voice sounds a little bit different, it's because I got sick. Guys, I got sick on Christmas Day. Is that not blasphemy? I feel like it is. And I feel like it was a personal attack. But we made it through, and we're here, and we are congested, but hopefully not too noticeably. And we're at the tail end of it, I feel. So, definitely on the come up, if you know what I mean. But today, I wanted to talk about the concept of judgment again and why it's kind of become harder for me to judge people as I grow older, because I definitely feel like that's a trend that I've noticed in my interactions with others as of late. Now, I grew up with a quite solid understanding of the value of perception and how that will definitely have an impact on your interactions with others and where you'll get placed like in the social hierarchy. Now, an important thing to note is that I grew up as a first generation or second generation American. My mom moved here when she was in her 20s, but I'm the first to have been born here, in my little bloodline. And having that sort of multifaceted understanding of society when it comes from an African household to, French and American, like US, whatever, because, my mom moved from Cameroon to Paris and then to the United States. And there's definitely some huge differences in the way that society sees these other countries, wherever you are placed. And so I grew up with like a pretty solid understanding of how important it is to be part of a certain society and where it kind of leans on the scale in different areas of life, whether that's professionally, family-wise, anything of that sort. And I'm not going to place my own judgment here, but it was definitely a theme that I was very cognizant of. Now, as of late, like I mentioned, I realized that it's kind of become a kind of second thought in my brain, and this was not the case when I was growing up. I grew up in a French American school where there were three kind of social groups. There were many cliques within those groups, but the main groups were like the Frenchies, the French people whose parents were ambassadors or worked in the United States, so they moved their entire family for a few years, for their whole lives, how many years, whatever, to the United States and just happened to go to this French school. And then there were the Americans whose parents wanted them to speak French and wanted them to grow in that kind of nature, that kind of bilingual vibe. So then they went to this French school. So then there were the Frenchies and the Americans, and then there were like the other, and I was part of this other group, right? There weren't that many like POC. And cliques were just very much part of my day-to-day life, It was definitely something that I had to swim through when I was growing up. And this mindset was only kind of perpetrated throughout my education. And I mean, it's important to note that I was part of the private education system throughout my entire life. I went to public school for about a week in my eighth grade. And I went to public school in Paris for about 3 months in, I believe it was fifth grade. I'm not too sure though. Something around those ages. And so a lot of my education was in the private education system. And with that came a lot of a thought and, that conversation of privilege as well as just hierarchy. And hierarchy exists in whatever societal structure you are in, but it was very intense in the private education system, and it was very much at the forebrain of my approach through life, right? And Western development, I feel, is very, very much lenient or leans upon this kind of concept of thought heavily. I feel like it's very much a part of the way that we move around others and the way that we choose what steps to take in when it comes to our lives and when it comes to our careers, when it comes to our social relationships, our romantic relationships. A lot of the time, you're going to see that sort of hierarchy and kind of judgment of us versus them. They are above us, they are below us. That kind of conversation is really, really prominent, I feel, in Western, civilization. But, as of late, I feel like I noticed a switch in my thought process. Sorry, that cold. It's coming back. I'm just kidding. I feel like I noticed a switch because when I was in high school and, I grew up in quite a little bubble, I feel like, or maybe I'll say, no, I'll say high school. I'll say high school. I'll say early to late high school, which just means high school. I kind of wanted to be this mean girl. And I don't know when it began, and I don't really know when it ended. But I do know that there was a time where I thought that being the mean girl was almost desirable. And I feel like a lot of people will have gone through this, especially with movies such as Mean Girls and such as, the, I don't even know. I don't know why Bratz dolls came to mind. Just being that girl, like being that bitch, and not wanting anybody to, take you for granted. I feel like that was kind of a role in society that I wanted to bring upon myself. And I wanted that to be me. I wanted to be this mean girl who passed judgment. And I'm not necessarily proud of that at all. But I definitely think that that fizzled out as I grew up. And it's kind of interesting to think back to that kind of want in my teenage self. And whether that was kind of a self-preservative type of thought process, is up in the air. But I thought it was interesting because it soon became overpowered when I came to understand the value of context. And context, also known as just perspective, I've talked about before, but perspective and context is so, so important when you're building relationships and wading yourself through current relationships as well as passing through old ones. Perspective is that thing that's going to allow you to maintain a kind of level head when it comes to different situations throughout your life, as well as build relationships that are, outside of what you particularly as an individual will have known for your entire life. And I think perspective is one of those major tools that are so important and so necessary to an individual's development or, like a prosperous development in life. You're not going to be able to have that kind of multifaceted personality, way of thinking, outlook upon life if you are only living according to one unique perspective. It's just not going to be possible. And very fortunately on my part, I grew up with a lot of different ways of life, circling through my life when it comes to my African upbringing at home and my kind of Western education and societal, growth because I grew up in New York. There's definitely going to be that kind of tug of war when I was growing up, but I definitely think it was very beneficial to me when it came to growing out of that sort of mean girl mindset and growing out of that us versus them necessity cliquey mindset. I think that having that understanding of context allowed me to see past, classes. It allowed me to see past how one's income and how one's, career places them in my, mind of how I value a person. And I feel like it's very easy to look at someone's class and look at someone's, income or career and kind of judge them upon that. And it's kind of a traditional way of thinking, especially with last week's topic of, legacies and how important it was back in the day. We're kind of moving away from that as a society, and a lot of that comes with a greater understanding of context and a greater conversation, between different classes, with the internet and with just, you know, books and podcasts and all of this media that allows us to understand, you know, experiences on this earth that aren't, natural to the unique you, if you will. But beyond that, a greater understanding of context also allowed me to understand where my morals lied. And it allowed me to kind of understand where to place my, blame. When it comes to a certain conflict, I was able to kind of lean on this newfound understanding of context and perspective. And I kind of understood, growing up throughout college as well, some people are going to act in different ways. And sometimes that can be not necessarily excused, but explained by their upbringing and their past. And some will act, badly despite having been set up for a bright future and a bright, kind of outlook on life. And having that kind of context and understanding definitely helped me lean away from that sort of judging eye that I might have had on others. Another big tool that I kind of realized when I started gaining this newfound understanding, right, is how the majority nor the minority is where I need to be when it comes to a position on a topic. Let's say that, let's talk about water bottles, for example. If the majority of the world wanted a Swell water bottle, I don't know if you guys remember those, the Swell water bottles back in circa 2015 were like the rave. Never mind Hydro Flask, I don't even know if they were around. But, we had the Swell water bottle. And then if you have, what's that other one? The ones that are clear that a lot of people have that have the larger wide lip twist. I'll add it in the video version for the YouTube. But hopefully the Apple Podcast and Spotify listeners know what I mean. Like those like larger water bottles that everybody has. Let's say that the majority is obsessed with Swell. Little me would have been like, oh my gosh, I love Swell. Like that is so good. And a lot of that has to do with, childhood and development and wanting to go with the herd and wanting to, protect yourself almost from exclusion. So you go with the majority. But I feel like, especially with middle school and high school, there was kind of this other side of the coin where it's like you want to be not like the other girls. You want to be like, I don't like the Swell. Like I like the non-popular little water bottle brand. Like I actually like the Gatorade bottles. The ones that people would get given like during games, like basketball, football, whatever. It's like, no, I actually like the Gatorade water bottles. Like, I don't know about you guys. Like, I don't know about Swell, but I like Gatorade. I don't know what you guys mean. Like, I feel like as I grew older, you kind of lean away from having to be part of the majority or having to be part of the minority. And I feel like that was kind of a great lesson to learn in allowing me to kind of find my own way and find my own, perspective and opinion on the matter. And I feel like the major switch up that occurred after I had this kind of shift in my understanding of those around me is that I found judgment to be a lot more difficult to come by. And that's not to say that I don't judge people any longer. That's definitely not the case. But I find it a lot more to have such an absolute opinion on a person just because of how much I understand context to play a role. I recently read a book. I have it right here, actually. I recently read Breakfast at Tiffany's by Truman Capote, Capote in French. I don't know. Capote. No matter the author, you all know the book, Breakfast at Tiffany's. I thought that it was very interesting because of how different the light in which the main character, what's her name actually? What is her name? Why can I not remember? Holly. Um, it's so interesting to see how Holly is perceived when it comes to the book version of the story, because I read the Goodreads reviews and a lot of people disliked it and disliked the light in which Holly was painted when it came to the book versus the movie. And keep in mind, I've never seen the movie and I plan to soon now that I read the book. But it's my understanding that the Holly in the movie version is endearing. She is fly by the seat of her pants. She's, beautiful. She's sweet. She's likable. But the book version of Holly isn't so much the case. She is almost selfish and egotistical and very much relies on perception and being perceived as this socialite, this rich, beautiful, almost adventurous type of personality. And it kind of led me onto that sort of reflection upon perception and judgment, because I feel like a lot of the characters, no, not characters, a lot of the reviewers on Goodreads were really judging her based on this type of personality and saying how she is so unlikable and how she's a terrible person. But I feel like a lot of the time you're forgetting the context behind the reason why people act a certain way. And Holly's, past was certainly a complicated one. And I mean, I recently read Bridgerton book 4. I also read book 5 and I loved it. But book 4 that I read, I mentioned it in a couple weeks ago. I think it was Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. Oh wait, actually, I lied. Bridgerton book 5, To Serve Philip with Love, I think it's called. I read the Goodreads reviews for that book, and it was kind of shocking to see how disliked the main character in that book was. And while I understand while I understand the hate that he was receiving, as a character, I also found it a little bit disheartening to see how little people placed the blame more so on his past for his actions rather than his present actions, because a lot of the way that we act is kind of a reaction to what we've known. And I feel like that was very much the case when it came to understanding Philip's character in that novel. And I feel like that's kind of what's led me out of this almost judgmental spiral, of my teenage years, and allowed me to kind of have a lighter, energetic presence when it comes to being around people that I would not necessarily have, spent time in their company. Because with judgment comes, exclusion. With judgment comes an us versus them, and it becomes a cliquey sort of existence. And you will tend to spend a lot of time and converse with people who are very similar to you, have similar experiences to you, have similar views and similar morals to you. And while that does remain important, it doesn't necessarily, substitute for that loss that will come with only existing with those who have similar backgrounds to you. And an ability to look past judgment is so important when it comes to building new relationships and new understandings on life. And that's almost not going to be possible if you remain on this, high horse of, I'm better than them, the way that I feel is better, or the way that I feel is right, and the way that I, think about this particular conflict, or the way that I think about this particular subject is the correct way. That is going to be extremely limiting. And, that's not going to be cognizant with an eventual growth in character. And I feel like that's kind of the major trend that I've realized in recent years when I kind of came out of that judgmental, spiral. And it is a happier existence to be in, free of judgment and free of that kind of shame, because with judgment comes the other side of the coin of being judged. When you free yourself of, being judged, you can almost easily allow that, privilege to other people around you. If you're so afraid of being judged and so afraid of doing something out of the ordinary, it's evident that you're going to be, putting that judgment, putting that blame upon others and vice versa. If you find yourself judging others constantly, being like, this is terrible, like, how can they do this? Like, this is so weird, like, they're terrible, whatever, you're not going to be able to allow yourself to step outside of your comfort zone and allow yourself to push yourself out of your boundaries. And with that is going to come stagnation. And I feel like that's the major lesson that I've learned. You have to rely and trust that perspective and context can allow some leeway when it comes to people's personality and people's character. And also maintaining that understanding that what you've known for the past, decades, however long you've been alive, is not necessarily all that's out there and is not necessarily all that's right. And I feel like that's been, what's been on my mind ever since I read this little novella. And it's really interesting. I honestly do really recommend this book. I loved it. And by this book, I'm talking about Breakfast at Tiffany's for the audio listeners. I loved it. I thought it was the cutest little book. And I was worried about it, honestly, because it was written in the he was born in the 20s. Roaring 20s. It was written in the 40s, I believe. And I feel like those types of books are like harder for me to read. I don't know why. I mean, I know why. It's like the oldish English, but I honestly really, really enjoy the journey. And it's really short, and the three little short stories are really cute. And it's kind of like holiday-esque. So if you're listening to this like near its, publication date, I really recommend, because we're still kind of in the holiday season, you guys. So I say put it on your list. And it's a cute little, she's so cute. I mean, I thrifted this cover. I thrifted this, version. What is it called? Edition, if you will. And I think it's from the 60s. So I don't know if you guys enjoy that. You can take a screenshot and Google image search if you would like. It's the Penguins Classics version. But I think that's all I have for you guys today. I really hope you enjoyed. I think that the concept of judgment is really interesting, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, please. And you can always reach me at Kalopsia Pod on Instagram or TikTok, or at Sydney Jotita on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And please reach out. I would love to read your comments and concerns and compliments. And leave a review, subscribe, everything, all of the above. If you guys are audio listeners and you do not know, I am posting the video versions on YouTube every week. Sometimes late. I forgot to mention that at the beginning of the episode. I posted last week's episode on YouTube a couple days ago, / yesterday possibly, because I did not have Wi-Fi on my trip home, so I could not upload the video on YouTube. So that's why there was a delay on that front. But the episode did go live on Friday, so you guys can go listen to that, and it's all on air on YouTube as well now, and all up for your consumption. But I really hope that you guys enjoyed this week's episode. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you next week. Bye.